Coming up on Chasing the Natty, the stage is set. If you are listening to this, you have likely made it into your CFF League's playoffs, and therefore, you're going to want some guys to help you out in your playoff runs over the next 2 weeks. Lucky for you, we have a brand new set of players you could be adding to your roster that could be the difference between you falling short of your championship or winning it all. We've got all of that and more coming right after this.
To go, breaks the tackle, he's 10, he's touchdown! Cook's gonna throw the deep ball, and Burton past the defense, touchdown Luther Burton! Milrow gonna run it again, got a lane, kicked in the turbo, Milrow, goodbye, touchdown Bama!
This is Chasing the Natty, a college fantasy football podcast. All right, welcome in everyone. This is Jared Palmgren, host of the Chasing the Natty podcast. I hope you guys are having a wonderful ride to your work on this Monday morning. We are the College Fantasy Football Podcast on the Campus of Canton Podcast Network. You can find us on all of your podcast feeds and on YouTube every Monday and Wednesday morning during the season at 6 a.m. sharp. If you want to support the great work we are doing here, head on over to campusofcanton.com, subscribe there to any of our phenomenal tiers. We have content ranging on all sorts of college football games, whether it's CFF, Devy, C2C, College IDP, College DFS. Really, if you play it, then we've got content, whether that's tools, rankings, pretty much everything you need to succeed. If you want to get in touch for whatever reason, you can find me in the show on Twitter. I'm at CFF_Jared. The show is at Chasing the Natty, and I should have some Blue Sky accounts up soon here as well. It seems like a lot of people are heading over there as well. So I'll be posting on both that and Twitter probably going forward. Just try to expand my audience there a little bit. If you guys have not already, though, make sure you show us some love by leaving a like, a comment, and subscribe on the YouTube side of things. If you're on the podcast side of things, make sure you leave a 5-star review. Make sure you're following the show wherever you are. Not only does that show us support, but again, you show the game of college fantasy football in general support when you do that. And you should do it for all of your favorite CFF shows. I mean, obviously, we do what we do here, but, you know, Burning the Red Shirt, obviously checking out, you know, CFF All Access over there at Fantasy Points. They do a phenomenal job. The guys at CFF List, they have YouTube channels and everything like that. Whenever you come across college fantasy content, make sure you do all those little things, y'all. It helps us out a ton. So, y'all, I really need to stop beginning all these shows exacerbated about how far we enter the season and like how fast everything's gone by and everything. When these things are all true, but like, it really, really starts to hit you at this point in the season. I don't know about y'all. I had myself a decently eventful weekend. Again, my girlfriend was out of town, so had a nice little Ask Me Anything on Friday night. That was nice. Obviously, the games yesterday, my dogs getting the big win over Tennessee. I had a tweet of mine go. I don't want to say viral because like that. I don't think a tweet with less than 10,000 likes is really viral, and I don't even know if like what the actual threshold of going viral, quote unquote, is. But I made a joke about Travis Hunter's performance yesterday against Utah because that game finished, and I heard some media folks talking on TV talking about like Travis Hunter's Heisman performance today, and I'm like, okay, let's see on the stat sheet again. All right, 5 catches, 55 yards, interesting. 1 carry, 5 yards, and a touchdown, and then he had an interception as well. And I was like, okay. On the stats, I'm like, I wouldn't really call that Heisman. But then even when I dug, because I didn't watch this game at first, but then when I dug in a little bit more in terms of like what exactly happened here, I found out that one, the interception that Hunter got wasn't even caused by him. It just happened to be a random tip off of another player, and Hunter just happened to be standing right where the ball went. Didn't even make like an acrobatic play or anything to like grab the ball out of the air. Literally just popped basically right into his breadbasket. He had one pretty insane catch. I give him credit for that. His rushing touchdown came when they were up 3 scores already. It was very much a definitionally garbage time touchdown that it was so clear they were just trying to get him an extra touchdown for Heisman purposes. And so like I basically like threw all that out there, and also he got burned for like 40 yards on a touchdown. I threw all that out there in a joke, and that's going viral, or not going viral. You guys know what I mean? It's viral to me. It's viral to me because I never have a tweet with this many likes. But boy, oh boy, Colorado and Travis Hunter fans are not very happy with me. So that's been fun to deal with this weekend. But enough of that. You guys don't really care about all that. You don't care that I'm getting roasted by, people who have been watching college football for about 2 years now. You guys want to hear about the waiver wire. You guys want to hear about what we're going to do to help you bring home the CFF championships here. Again, as we kind of finish up the season here, the honest truth is, y'all, again, there's really not much out there in terms of people you can grab that you can really feel like are going to make a difference. One, the bye weeks are coming to an end. Yes, we still have teams like Oregon, Memphis, all on bye, or New Mexico, obviously a very big one for, Devin Dampier managers. So some big names out this week for sure, and that's why we're going to continue to do the waiver wire show for this week. But, especially next week when there's no teams on bye or anything like that, there's not really much room for the waiver wire being involved in your process at that point. Like, you get your full roster back at that point, unless you're in like a super deep league and you're constantly having to shift guys in and out. But if you're in like a standard league, like if you've made it to the championship, you got your guys, right? So that's why this episode today is probably going to be a little bit shorter than what we do. Very similar to last week, where I have 2 to 3 guys that I'm really going to break down. Very much going to still go over some of the honorable mentions, some guys we've covered in previous weeks very quickly on that front. But yeah, this is actually going to be the final waiver wire show of the year. Again, to me, after this week, again, if you get into your championship leagues, the waiver wire is not really going to be the thing that helps you. At that point, it becomes a matter of start and sits, which is why Justin and I will still have our start sit show for week 13. But in terms of a full-on waiver wire show, I might put out some tweets or some about some guys that maybe are worth picking up here after this week. But for the most part, it's probably going to be a lot of the same guys I'll be discussing here today. So wouldn't want to bore you guys with another hour-long show of me just going over guys that we've gone over before. So that's kind of the plan moving forward. That's kind of what we're looking at over the next 2 weeks. Again, just recap, this is the last waiver wire show. Next week, we're still going to have our start sit shows with Justin and I, so be on the lookout for those. That being said, let's dive into this. Let's take a look at some quarterbacks for this week. I got 3 new quarterbacks that I'll be discussing, 2 of which I'm pretty big on. One of which, I'll be real, it's kind of just filling I was kind of filling the show sheet here. He was just good enough that I consider like talking about him. But like I mentioned in the intro, I'm probably going to go over these honorable mentions real quick first, because in my opinion, a lot of these guys are probably better than the people that I'm going to fully break down. But Kenton Hauser didn't have the greatest performance this past week in terms of touchdowns. 3 interceptions really didn't help, but only scoring 1 touchdown really hurt. But if you look at the bones of his performance, right, 314 passing yards, 37 attempts, everything's still there for him to have a phenomenal game, so long as he doesn't have that bad touchdown luck. Great news for Hauser here is he gets North Texas this week, which should prove to be a phenomenal matchup for him. We thought Tulsa would be a phenomenal matchup for him last week, but again, that bad touchdown luck there, right? So Hauser, pick him up. He's 26% rostered. There's plenty of leagues that still have him. I'd actually be grabbing him if he's off the waiver wire, especially if it's a 6-point passing touchdown league. Who else we got here? Owen McCowan, fresh off a great performance against North Texas here. Finished the game with 31.96 fantasy points. Throwing 43 times, 379 yards, 2 touchdowns. Dude was just chucking it all over the place. And yeah, I don't really think there's much else to add there. Again, he just had a great performance against a bad defense. Great news. He gets Temple this week. Temple, who could completely fall apart. They just fired their head coach. And, sometimes that, fires up a team. But I can't remember Temple's win-loss record off the top of my head. But let's see. Temple Owls. They're 3-7. They're not even fighting for a bowl at this point. I don't think that there's any real bad blood between Temple and UTSA, that Temple's going to get fired up to potentially ruin UTSA's season, because I think UTSA still needs 1 more win for a bowl game. If anything, UTSA's got plenty to play for there. So I would think that UTSA is going to basically clobber Temple this weekend. Owen McCown will be a big part of that. Who else we got here? Colton Joseph, the quarterback out of Old Dominion. He gets marshaled this week. Fantastic for Joseph's legs this week. Again, he's been great the last couple of weeks. 25 points against App State, 29 points versus James Madison, which in my opinion is infinitely more important than that 25 points versus App State, because James Madison's defense is very, very solid. Now, granted, a lot of that came off of Joseph running the ball in 3 times and then throwing the ball another time for a touchdown. Very touchdown dependent in that performance, considering that he had less than 50% completion of his passes. But that's all we need sometimes in CFF. But again, thankfully, he has Marshall this week, a much, much better matchup in my opinion. Let's see who else we got here. Parker Navarro. Good Lord, Parker. We thought he was going to go off against Kent State. Didn't really happen, against some bad touchdown luck there. But then oh boy, good Lord, he destroyed Eastern Michigan this past week. Again, they won that game 35-10, 32 passing attempts, 277 yards. No touchdowns to the air, but 106 yards and 4 touchdowns on the ground later. Parker Navarro, I think, finished as the QB 2 or 3 on the week. I think it depends on whether or not you have a 4-point passing touchdown league or a 6-point passing touchdown league. But regardless, he was certainly in the top 5. He had the performance this week that I thought he was going to have against Kent State. He gets Toledo this week, another matchup that he really shouldn't have too much problems with. If he's able to take over Eastern Michigan like that, Toledo should not be a problem at all. And then, last but not least, Lenore Sellers. Again, a roster percentage that is much higher than what I normally do, which is why I'm sticking him here in the honorable mentions. He's rostered in 41% of leagues. But man, if Sellers is available in your league, he's worth going and grabbing right now. He has been playing some great ball ever since South Carolina came out of their second bye week. Against Texas A&M, 34 fantasy points there. Against Vanderbilt, 21, not great, but still pretty, it's not going to tank your week. And then this past week against Missouri, 38.62 fantasy points. A lot of production on the ground here. Well over 200 yards over his last 3 games here. He's only had 1 touchdown on the ground, and quite frankly, given the production that he's had, wouldn't be surprised if that... I wouldn't be surprised if he's able to find the end zone once or twice on the ground this week, because he's playing Wofford. He's playing an FCS opponent. Yes, you are running the risk a little bit of, them getting to halftime. Sellers only has 1 to 2 touchdowns because Raheem Sanders ran it in 3 times or something like that, right? But in terms of just the potential upside of Sellers, given the way he's been playing recently, I think it's worth grabbing if he's available in your league. So those are honorable mentions. Again, there's a lot of the guys I've talked about already. Pretty much Sellers is the only new name there, and like I said, I only put him here because he's already pretty decently rostered in leagues, but I double check to make sure that he's not available. So let's actually break down some of these guys here that some new names here. As I say new names, but this first guy is actually a guy I mentioned last week on the start-sit shows, and that is CJ Ogbonna, the quarterback out of Buffalo, rostered on 2% of leagues. This past week, he went absolutely bananas against Ball State, and that's exactly what I was hoping for. It was a little bit of a slow start, but he got things going here eventually, and he was able to finish the day with 37 passing attempts for 264 yards and 3 touchdowns. He also ran the ball extremely well. 7 rushing attempts for 55 yards and 2 touchdowns. Finished the game with 51 points on offense. Just a phenomenal performance by the Bulls here. Again, I knew that Ogbonna had this kind of performance in him. We hadn't seen a really big performance from Ogbonna, which is why I didn't fully put him on my waiver wire recommendations last week. But given Ball State's defense, which is atrocious, it was definitely something that I had my eye on last week, and that's why I made him one of my start sits, even though when the episode came out, he had already played. Or when we recorded the episode, he had not played, but by the time you guys heard it, he had already played, so technically kind of counts. But regardless, I'm making him an official play, because if he was able to do that against Ball State, his last 2 games of the season could not be any better than you would want to expect from a max schedule here. He gets Eastern Michigan, who we just talked about getting destroyed by Ohio this weekend. Specifically, a dual threat quarterback, which Ogbonna is. And then they finish the season with Kent State in the championship game. if you're struggling, if you've made it this far and you're still struggling at all at quarterback, I think Ogbonna has to be at the top of your waiver wire pickups for this week, even compared to any of the other ones. Because again, this schedule is just absolutely phenomenal to finish the season here. So, yeah, CJ Ogbonna, the quarterback out of Buffalo. Let's move on to our second option here, and that is Mr. Jaden Maiava, the quarterback out of USC. Passed for 259 yards and 3 touchdowns this past week. Also ran the ball a couple of times here. 5 attempts, 20 yards, and a touchdown. Rostered on 24% of leagues. Miller Moss's time with the Trojans, if I do believe so, is done. He lasted a lot longer than I think a lot of people were really expecting, but we all kind of knew eventually that if Miller Moss wasn't performing to, a Caleb Williams or a typical Lincoln Riley quarterback level, they were going to make the change at one point. Like I said, it took longer than we were expecting, but this was kind of exactly what we thought was going to happen with USC. And we finally got to see, a full-time start here against a pretty solid defense, and Maiava did dang well. Again, like I said, 30 fantasy points on the day. The thing that Maiava really brings to this is he didn't rush a ton, right? Like I said, he only had 5 rushing attempts, but it's just having that extra, option in that offense, right? A guy that can extend plays. Because again, Miller Moss is just an absolute statue back there. Like Maiava, it actively is a part of his game where he can keep the ball, he can keep the play going longer. He could take off if he needs to or anything like that. He can be a threat around the red zone. The offense just seems to be running a little bit better with him back there. And I think that's something we have to keep an eye out for with future Lincoln Riley quarterbacks is that if we're going to statue back there, a guy that's not going to be able to move very much, which Moss, he could run a little bit, but it was nowhere near like what Maiava or even a Caleb Williams or a lot of quarterbacks for Lincoln Riley could do beforehand. So I like Maiava moving forward. I think he's an absolutely great, oh my gosh, how do I say this? I like Maiava moving forward. I think he'll be an upgrade to this USC offense. I think they're going to be able to score a little bit more. We'll see what his tendencies are when it comes to target distribution. Does it kind of follow the Lincoln Riley expectation of spreading the ball around, or does Maiava kind of key in on a couple of guys here? That we'll see over the next couple of weeks here, but the 2 games to finish the season, one is great, the one is a little bit rougher. So the first game is this weekend. It's at UCLA. On the road's always a little tough, but UCLA outside the top 100 and passing defensive team performance here. They're 109th. They're 55th against the run. So, if Woody Marks is not able to get going as much, Maiava's going to need to get more involved. Maybe they use his legs instead of Marks, kind of doing some read options there to kind of open up the run game a little bit. I can expect Maiava to have a pretty solid performance this weekend against UCLA. If you want to grab him and spot start him, I wouldn't blame you whatsoever. Especially if you got like a Dylan Gabriel on your bench, Seth Hennigan, some of these guys you might have been relying on the last couple of weeks, or Devin Dampier as well. But the championship matchup here against Notre Dame's definitely cause for the concern. Again, Notre Dame's defense has been phenomenal, really in every game except, well, even in the Northern Illinois game, the defense did their part. It's just the offense couldn't do anything. So, but like I said, their defense is top 10 in our defensive team performance ratings. They're top 25 against the run, top 10 against the pass. Definitely wouldn't love starting Maiava against that matchup there in championship week. But again, everybody should be back after week 13. You should be able to start all of your guys. Bada bing, bada boom. Let's move on to our last quarterback option here, and that is going to be Mr. Ashton Daniels, quarterback out of Stanford, rostered on 20% of leagues. This past week, he was able to throw the ball 33 times for 298 yards and 3 touchdowns. He also ran the ball 22 times for 34 yards. Good Lord, man, that is some inefficient running. But here's the thing, I know for a fact he can do better than that. So, Daniels is a very interesting person to have in CFF. It has been a very, very up and down season for Daniels, really for this entire Stanford offense. It's been, you can't really predict when they're going to go off, because I thought Louisville was going to absolutely body bag Stanford here, but this offense has been clicking the last couple of weeks. Again, against NC State, obviously NC State just poured it on to Stanford, but Daniels was able to run the ball a ton, 11 carries, 129 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And then this past week against Louisville, I already read out the stats, but Daniels was actually able to pass the ball. That's not really something we've seen a ton out of Daniels over the last couple of weeks. And so you take a look at his upcoming matchups. He gets Cal, he gets San Jose State. Cal's defense pretty solid, but can be taken advantage of. Again, if this we know with Troy Taylor, right, that if this offense gets going, this could be a ton of fun. Now, as you can kind of tell with the tone of my voice, compared to Maeva, compared to Ogbonna, I'm definitely a little bit more hesitant here with Daniels. But if you're really, really struggling, you're in a deeper league, and you just need some kind of upside play, Daniels provides that. Again, he's got some great rushing ability. As we saw against Louisville, when he turns it on in the passing game, he can be a legit threat there. So we'll definitely see what he looks like against Cal. Because if he looks good against Cal, I will feel very good about him being a potential spot starter in the championship game there against San Jose State to finish the season. So, all right. Well, that being said, let me take a sip of water, then let's move on to some running backs. And of course, the first running backs I need to talk about are our honorable mentions. These are guys, again, I've discussed in the past. So away we go here. Again, Marshall, talked about him last week. He goes against James Madison this week. I don't love that matchup, but given the volume that Marshall has seen over the last couple of weeks, I don't think that it is a death sentence for his value this week. I think it's still possible for him to finish the game with 100 yards and a touchdown. And then really it is that next weekend in the championship week, which I forgot to write this down, but I know for a fact it is a beautiful, beautiful matchup. Yes, Georgia Southern. He gets Georgia Southern there in week 13. Marshall could be a absolute game changer against that porous Georgia Southern rushing defense there. So I'd grab him, maybe sit him this week, and then get ready to play him in week 13. Keon Mosey, a phenomenal performance this past week, 196 yards and a touchdown against Kent State. Honestly, I wish he scored more touchdowns. This I don't get what's going on with Miami of Ohio. Nate Marquise pointed this out in our CFF Slack, where it's they just refuse to give Mosey red zone carries. It is the weirdest thing. He's clearly their main guy, but it's as soon as they get within 20 yards, they're we'll throw the ball a little bit more. We'll make sure that another running back gets the carries here. I don't know what the Red Hawks are doing, but that's super weird. But regardless, Mosey, I think, one of the few true volume pig guys you can grab right now. And so you grab him. Again, decently tough performance this week against Northern Illinois. Again, should have double checked his. Here we go. Let's look at the schedule. And then he gets Bowling Green. So 2 semi-decently tough matchups in the MAC by MAC standards to finish the year. But again, the volume he's been getting, I think it'll be more than enough for him to kind of overcome that. Speaking of volume, Dylan Carson, the running back at Air Force, roster on 22% of leagues. He has Nevada this week. It wasn't, a blow-away performance this past week, but, he's still got the volume, 26 carries, 97 yards, and a touchdown. Obviously, I don't love that efficiency, but, man, again, if he can just up that efficiency just a little bit more against a very porous Nevada defense here, Carson could be absolutely lethal if he's able to break a long one or two against this Nevada defense. So I like Carson this week. Let's see who else we got here. Aljay Henderson, running back out of Buffalo, 8% rostered on Fantrax this past week, 126 yards, 2 touchdowns on the ground, 2 catches, 19 yards. Easily his best performance, most complete performance all around, and really the first one we've really seen this Buffalo offense treat Henderson as a true bell cow back. This is huge going forward, in my opinion, for Henderson's value, not only just this year, but going into the future as well. They get Eastern Michigan this week, and I mentioned before when I talked about Ogbonna, they get Kent State in week 13. Henderson could be a key add in any kind of playoff race right now. So I go grab him. And then last one here I'll throw out here is George Pettaway, running back out of James Madison. Rostered on 34%, again, a little bit higher than what we normally do. But he gets App State this weekend. App State's defense is absolutely porous. This past week against Old Dominion, we didn't see Petaway find the end zone, but he still had his 19 carries, 82 yards. He should be fine. He should be able to find the end zone once again against App State. He'll have a nice bounce back week this week. So, those are honorable mentions at running back. Let's actually break down some of these newer names that I'm going to throw out here. And the first one is a guy that I have to eat a little bit of crow on. This is Kai Robichaux, running back out of Boston College. Roster on 21% of leagues. He is facing North Carolina this week. I did not want to trust Bill O'Brien and the way he was breaking things up with his running backs. And he's got a long history of running committees, and for the most part, that's what we've seen this year. But I saw Robichaux's 28 carry, 198 yard performance last week, and I said that's going to be a fluke. As much as I like Robichaux, because I had him last year. Last year, Robichaux was great, but I just didn't trust his staff to really create a volume pig situation here. Well, I was wrong. Robichaux had a great game this past week against SMU, 21 rushing attempts, 90 yards, 2 touchdowns to the ground. He also had a catch for 7 yards, and not much to add there, but it's amazing to me that we're able to actually get some decent volume plays here at the end of the season when it comes to running backs. Again, some guys emerging really, really late here, I guess, as these teams are really trying to figure out, like, all right, who are we going to rely on to get the bowl eligibility? Who are we going to rely on to make sure that we get a better bowl spot, things like that. They find some guys that they're willing to feed over and over again. I go back and forth on Robichaux's finish of the schedule here because he gets North Carolina and he gets Pitt. Pitt's rushing defense is pretty dang solid. As of last week, they were 19th in the country in rushing defensive team performance. But that's going to be even higher this week after Pitt's defense. Let's see. I once again should have just written this down. But like Clemson was completely bottled up in the run game this past week. Like, Phil Maffa couldn't do anything. Yeah, Phil Maffa had 17 carries for 17 yards. I mean, Cade Klubnik had -9 rushing yards up until that final play where Klubnik ran the ball 50 yards for a touchdown, right? Like, it was about to be an 8 yards rushing carry on the day, or 8 yards team performance when it comes to rushing on the day for Clemson. Like, Pitt's defense was completely smothering. So I'm a little worried about, like, starting Robichaux. But Boston College and UNC, that should be a decently high-scoring game. UNC's defense, while much improved from compared to what we've seen in previous years, they're still pretty decently susceptible. And given the fact that Robichaux was able to run on SMU's defense, which is a pretty solid defense, I think that Robichaux should at the very least have himself a nice game against North Carolina this weekend. A great ad off the waiver wire to plug in for, if you had Jordan James or Mario Anderson or Eli Sanders. Like, this is a great replacement for those guys this week. Another running back that we can discuss here is a guy that's been kind of on... What? Oh, okay. I guess we're going out of order. Never mind. We're gonna go with Aaron Young here, running back out of Old Dominion, rostered on 3% of rosters. Going up against Marshall this week. This past week against James Madison, 17 carries, 116 yards, and a touchdown. No reception work here. Aaron Young has very much been a guy that I've had my eye on a little bit, but I just wasn't really seeing that, clear RB1 potential workhorse. And we still haven't really seen the workhorse volume here, but what I have seen is some pretty consistent production here, right? 77 rushing yards versus Georgia Southern and a touchdown on just 14 attempts. He followed that up the next week against App State with 14 carries for 110 yards. Didn't get a touchdown there, but then against James Madison, which, like I said, like the fact that Old Dominion was able to put up 32 points on James Madison was a very, very good performance by them. And Aaron Young was a big part of it. 17 carries, 116 yards, and a touchdown. All this is fine and dandy, Jared, but like, what do they got coming up? Well, they have 2 phenomenal matchups over the last 2 weeks here when it comes to running the ball. You get Marshall, who's 103rd in the country versus the run, and then you get Arkansas State, who's 128th. So you talk about bottom 6 team against the run here. Young, like I said, he doesn't have the volume, but given the fact that he's ran for 5.5, 7.9, and 6.8 yards per carry, respectively, over his last 3 games, like, Young can absolutely take advantage of Marshall and Arkansas State's defense. I think he's a great add for, especially in a deeper league. I think Young is a fantastic add. If you're in like a bit more of a shower league where, maybe you have some other options on your bench already, maybe you don't go after him. But for now, I think Young is phenomenal with a great end of season schedule. He'd be a good pickup. Again, last running back is Mr. Bryson Washington, the running back out of Baylor. This was a guy that really, I made it known before that one of my major faults as a CFF analyst is the fact that I stick with system. I like system. System is great. System has gotten me very far in what I do. But system can also make me blind to certain players and their talent levels, right? I did not like the idea of going after any Baylor running backs, given the fact that, Dave Aranda's done a committee approach in the past. We've seen guys like Richard Reese where it seems like, oh man, they're just locked in for production every single week, and then all of a sudden it's like they become chopped liver, like as if they never existed on this squad before. So I was hesitant to see a guy like Bryson Washington really emerge for the Bears down the stretch, and well, the last 2 weeks make it to where I can't ignore this anymore. Again, he has performed phenomenally. Again, 20 plus touches in each of his last 2 games, 120, or let's see, 100 and doing the math in my head here real quick, 180 plus yards in each of his last 2 games, including receiving and rushing, 4 touchdowns in each of his last 2 games. Like, Washington's just been on an absolute tear. This whole Baylor offense really has just been on a tear. Like, congratulations to the Bears. You guys have really figured something out. I know Dave Aranda, the announcement just got made that he will be retained, which, again, good on y'all. Like, I'm legitimately happy for you. Now, what does this mean going forward, right? Washington, again, I always have the hesitancy with this staff of like, this guy can go from having 20 plus carries every single week to next week he's going to have 6 because of whatever reason, right? So that's always going to be in the back of my head. But this final 2 game stretch of the season here between Houston and Kansas is not horrible, right? Houston, they're 65th against the pass, 70th versus the run. So you're talking about a very average defense overall for Houston there. And then afterwards, you get Kansas, who's 91st versus the run, 110th versus the pass. That is absolutely a game where Baylor should be able to put up some points there, and Washington will be a big part of that. So if for nothing else, grab Washington, stash him, play him during championship week. But also, if you played him against Houston this week, Houston's team has kind of fallen off just a little bit as the season's kind of gone along. They started off as a pretty solid defensive unit, as injuries happen, as fatigue happens, they've kind of fallen off a little bit. So I think he'll be good this weekend as well. But really, it's that last week against Kansas where I think where the prize is when it comes to rostering Washington. So that being said, let's move on to our wide receivers. And again, I got my honorable mentions first, so I'll get those out of the way, and then we'll discuss 2 wide receivers that I'll break down just a little bit more here. And really, it's because I really don't think there's really a ton of great options for wide receivers right now. Again, like overall this year, I should have written down some more stats for this, but like I've kind of noticed all year that this has just not been a fantastic year for CFF when it comes to wide receivers. And I think there's 2 things. I think we've had a lot of good wide receivers this year, but we don't have really a ton of truly elite wide receivers. I'm trying to pull up my spreadsheet, but now my whole internet's going down. It's all good. Yeah, it's still loading on my data. What happened to all my... That's not good. That's not good at all. All right. Anyway, sorry about that, y'all. Not sure what's going on with my spreadsheet. I was about to bring it up to illustrate some points, but basically we've had a lot of good wide receivers, not a lot of great wide receivers, and that's really holding true towards the end here when it comes to dynasty, when it comes to waiver wire pickups here, right? Like when we look at this list of honorable mentions, like Justin Lockhart had himself a phenomenal game this past weekend. I think that he could be in for an absolute great finish to the season here if San Jose State really continues this offensive game plan of only throw to Lockhart and Nick Nash. Like, those are your only two guys, especially with Lockhart being absolutely treated like the deep threat that he is on the outside there, right? Like, he doesn't need a ton of targets in the game to hit 100 yards. So Lockhart's great, but everybody else here has kind of got warts. Like Demir Miller, he's been great the last couple of weeks. Again, a lot of volume there, but he plays for Rutgers, so your scoring opportunity is going to be a little bit limited there. Jordan Napier, like on paper, Napier was phenomenal the last couple of weeks, just couldn't find the end zone. And then this past week against UNLV, granted UNLV's pass D is pretty solid, but 7 targets, 5 catches, no touchdowns there. Great news for Napier, though, is that he gets to face Utah State this week. That's a defense that, pray to God, San Diego State should absolutely be able, San Diego State should absolutely be able to take advantage of. And some of the other guys here, Cameron Shanks, man, up and down the last couple of weeks. If he doesn't have the volume, he's got the touchdown. If he's got the production and the volume, he ain't going to score a touchdown. It's just been one of those things where it's like you pick 2, can't get all 3 with Cameron Shanks. But he gets Rice this week. Rice, speaking of Rice, Matt Sykes on this list as well. I haven't seen what the over-unders for these games are quite yet. I think this is one of those games where it could go either way. You could be in for a defensive matchup between UAB and Rice, or could be a game where, a lot of points are scored. I know this riveting analysis of this is a game that could either be a really low-scoring game or it could be an absolute shootout and somewhere in between maybe. Who knows? Like, yeah, I'm covering all my bases there. But it really is just one of those games where it's kind of hard to tell just on paper what kind of game you're going to get. I'll be curious to see what Vegas thinks of that matchup between UAB and Rice there. And then any other names I didn't touch on here? Nope, hit on Miller, hit on Napier, hit on Shanks, hit on Sykes, hit on Lockhart. I'll throw True Edwards out there still. Again, he's still 38%, but he gets Arkansas this week. I know Arkansas's pass defense has really been suspect this year, but I still don't trust a G5 team to really do that to an SEC opponent, even if Arkansas's secondary is bad by Power 4 standards. So I'd hold off on that. And then Javon Tracy, he's been great, very consistent last couple of weeks, but he gets NIU this week. I don't love that matchup for anybody on Miami of Ohio's offense, so including Keon Mosey. So I probably might hold off on him as an official play. Speaking of official plays, we'll take a look at our 2 wide receivers here. The first one I got to throw out here is Mr. Joseph Williams, the true freshman wide receiver out of Tulsa. Just absolutely phenomenal what he has been doing. I'm actually going to double check myself on that true freshman call out there. I think he's a true freshman. Let me just do some quick research here. He is indeed, yep, he is a true freshman. So, huzzah, grab him in your dynasty leagues. But he's been great over the last couple of weeks, right? Against UAB, 10 targets, 112 yards, and a touchdown there. And just a phenomenal performance against East Carolina this past week. 9 targets, 5 catches, 158 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So, some consistent performance there from him. Obviously, I would like to see that target number be a little bit more consistent, because 3 weeks ago he had 5 targets, 4 catches, 55 yards against UTSA there. But clearly, this is a guy that is emerging for these Golden Hurricanes that they are continuing to rely on. Great news for everybody involved. There are some phenomenal matchups here to finish the season. They get South Florida this week, who's 99th versus the pass when it comes to defensive team performance. You get Florida Atlantic, who is 75th versus the pass, but also their rushing defense is literally bottom 4 in the country. And so I expect Tulsa to be able to move the ball in that game there as well, which is going to open up opportunities for Joseph Williams to kind of do his thing down the stretch. So I like the matchups here. I like what I've seen out of Williams recently. I love emerging freshmen down the track, because quite frankly, one thing that you got to kind of keep in mind of with these true freshmen is that there's so little game tape out there for guys like Williams. And so at the very least, defenses are not going to have the time to truly adjust for his impact on the game, right? That's going to be a concern next year if he continues to do what he's doing here. Like, and he could end up being like a Kevin Concepcion next year, but at least for right now, right? Like, I think Williams should be able to have himself some really nice games here to finish here against South Florida and Florida Atlantic. So Yeah, I like him. And then last wide receiver that we'll throw out here, our second one here, is Justin Bowick, another guy I got to eat crow on. I threw him out as a waiver wire trap last week, and, well, all he did was, yeah, he did overperform his previous game here. And this is a very much a scenario where Bowick transferred in during the offseason. He was hurt to start the season. They finally get him back, and just slowly but surely they have made him get fully involved in this offense, and now he's a clear piece, like a clear leading piece of this Ball State offense, which is really, really changed a lot over the last couple of weeks because, like, Braden Sloan's dead. I don't know what happened in that backfield because, like, Braden Sloan was performing pretty solidly, and then just all of a sudden they're just not giving him the ball anymore. He might be hurt. It's hard to get information out of the MAC, but regardless, like, he's done, and Bowick has become he's become the clear partner to Tanner Koziol at tight end there, right? This is the other guy that they're running the offense through. Over the last 2 weeks, 11 targets in each of his games, 148 plus in each of his games, three touchdowns in his last 2 games, right? Like I said, Bowick's clearly the main guy they're running this offense through, or at least this passing game through. Obviously, you know, they're still running the ball. They still got Tanner Koziol, but like Bowick's been the most impactful player for them. I don't love the last 2 matchups here, though, which is partially why I was considering not putting him on here, but I also didn't want to only leave you guys with one wide receiver option this week. But he gets Bowling Green, he gets Ohio. These are 2, I would say, of the tougher defenses in the MAC. You know, Bowling Green actually in our defensive team performance ratings for passing is top 20 in the country, so that's a bit of a problem for Bowick. But also, like I said, Bowick's one of these guys, right, where because of his late entry, his late emergence in the season, there's not a ton of game film on him. Maybe Bowling Green's talented enough to really slow him down regardless, but I think there's still a world where, you know, Ball State's still able to kind of get him open, to kind of work his way. I don't love the scoring opportunities that kind of come in that game, though, but we'll see. And then last week in championship week, Bowick will be facing Ohio's defense, who has been very solid for a MAC team. I'm definitely worried about this matchup as well. But you never know. Again, there's still a lot we don't know about Bowick. He might still be talented enough to overcome, you know, these tougher defensive matchups, regardless of, you know, how many people they put on him. Maybe he's just that good. We will definitely see. I would recommend with Bowick, you pick him up this week, sit him against Bowling Green, just kind of get a gauge of like, all right, how does he fare against, you know, some tougher defenses? Because let's be real, last week against Buffalo, that's not a tough defense, but the week before against Miami of Ohio, who has been a pretty solid defense, like Bowick has been, or did very well in that game, 8 catches, 171 yards, and a touchdown. But playing the devil's advocate for that, that was the first real game where Bowick was heavily involved into the offense. And so maybe I think they caught Miami of Ohio off guard on that one. So we will definitely see. And yeah, we got one more thing to cover here. I don't have any good tight end plays for you guys this week, at least none that I haven't mentioned before. So if you want to go check out the previous weeks, go listen to some of those names, guys like Cooper Mathers, guys like, you know, Anthony Lampier out of Memphis, things like that. So last but not least, let's hit up some of these DST streaming options for this week. For those of you who are streaming your defenses, got 4 names on here. If you're on a shallower league, I think the best defensive play that you can make this week is South Carolina going up against Wofford. This is a defense just not allowing anything right now. They've been absolutely phenomenal. Yes, Mizzou was able to put up, I think, 28 points on them this past week. So obviously, gave up a little bit there, but Wofford's not Mizzou. And so South Carolina's pass rush should be able to sack their quarterback quite a bit. I'm expecting multiple turnovers, maybe a defensive touchdown in here. But again, that's in a shallow league. Again, South Carolina's DSC is already rostered in 54% of leagues. So I would say don't hold your breath that they're available in your league. Some guys that are more available, Florida State going up against Charleston Southern. For all of Florida State's faults this year, they still have a pretty solid defense back there. At the very least, like one good enough to be able to hold down Charleston Southern for 60 minutes. And so I'm playing Florida State there. Michigan State, I'm once again picking on some bad offenses here, but Michigan State, they get Purdue this week. Purdue has been absolutely dreadful, even worse without Graham Harrell. Obviously, they're still figuring out who they're going to hire at offensive coordinator. They're not even really sure. Like the coaching carousel has not really gone into full effect yet, so they don't know what their identity is right now. They have some interim plays, but it's pretty clear they're not going to really get any kind of cohesion on offense right now. So I'll take advantage of that. Michigan State's defense is pretty solid, really, against everything but the pass. And what Purdue's problem is that they're not very good with the pass. So I think that Michigan State's defense should be able to hold down Purdue here. And then last but not least, a team that is definitely for some deeper leagues or like a G5 only league here. I'm going to go South Alabama versus Southern Miss. Very much just picking on Southern Miss's offense. They have scored a whopping 6 points combined over the last 2 weeks. So South Alabama began the season with, if I'm being real, just an absolutely porous defense, like absolutely garbage. And they've really improved week over week as the season's kind of gone along here. If I'm looking at South Alabama's schedule, I thought I had a graphic for this, or not a graphic, but I thought I had this in my notes already. Yeah, if I'm looking over the last couple of weeks here, like South Alabama, they were able to hold Louisiana to 22 points, and honestly, they were able to hold them to less than that for a good chunk of the game before some kind of garbage points there. They were able to hold UL Monroe to 17 points. They held Troy to 9, Arkansas State to 16, App State to 14. Like these are pretty solid defensive performances here from this defense, and they're going up against a team in Southern Miss, man, where, like I said, they've scored 6 combined points over the last 2 games. They scored 15 versus James Madison. They haven't scored more than 20 points since when was this game against Arkansas State? This was back in, can't find a date for it now. Good Lord. Oh, here back in mid-October. So a month ago was the last time that Southern Miss was able to put up a decent fight offensively, and that happened to come against an Arkansas State Red Wolves team that is pretty much bottom 10 in every defensive category. So South Alabama, that's a DST that I'm willing to roll with against Southern Miss. Against Southern Miss, there's just no identity on offense whatsoever, so we'll take advantage of that. All right. With that, again, I told you guys it was going to be a bit of a shorter show, and maybe you guys enjoy me kind of burning through a lot of these. Maybe you enjoy, getting a lot of information quickly, but here we are, about 45 minutes in. So with that, we've come to the end of our show. Appreciate you guys for listening. If you guys have not already, leave a like, a comment, and subscribe. If you're watching this on the YouTube side of things, if you're on the podcast side of things, make sure you follow the show, leave a 5-star review wherever you can. Make sure you guys check out the rest of the Campus to Canton podcast network for shows ranging on pretty much anything you can think of related to the college fantasy game. We'll see you guys back here on Monday. Yeah, we'll see you guys back here Wednesday, where Justin and I will be taking a look at your start-sit questions for this week. Obviously, very important ones as you guys want to get through your semifinal rounds of your playoffs. Until then, really appreciate you guys, and I hope you guys have a wonderful and blessed week. See ya.